Welcome back to another episode of Journey to Life with me, ArletteJones-Lawson, and my daughter and co-host, Constance Fields. Our topic today will focus on the complex healing process of grief. We are honored today with our special guest, Alexia Ford.
Yes, Alexia, we're so glad that you're here. Alexia Ford is an LMSW, and she obtained a master in Divinity in 2018. She completed a year-long internship as a hospital chaplain and is currently employed as a hospice chaplain since 2020. She is no stranger to helping individuals and families with processing death, dying, and bereavement. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for asking me and involving me. This is such a topic that I think that is not discussed often enough. So I am just so glad that you all thought to bring this topic up for discussion. And thank you for including me.
Well, welcome. And we are so honored to have you a part of this discussion. It is such an important discussion to have. And we just feel like it's going to help so many people. So let's get started by examining what is grief. So one of the definitions of grief is that grief is a strong, sometimes overwhelming emotion for people, regardless of whether their sadness stems from the loss of a loved one or from a terminal diagnosis that they or someone that they love have received. So what do you ladies think about that, the definition of grief?
I think that, that rings true to a certain extent, because grief can look different for everybody. Grief can look different in all the ways. People grieve lots of things, from the loss of a pet to the loss of a job, the loss of a relationship. And so I think when people define grief and loss, they specifically hone in on death. But I think it doesn't have to look like that. Alexia, would you agree?
Absolutely. I've had people to mourn the loss of having to grow up too soon and just realizing it later in life that, they lost their childhood because of whatever circumstances. And I'm so glad that you mentioned divorce and, just the loss in relationships, because divorce is a huge loss. It causes a lot of grief. So there's so many aspects, I think, to that term grief and what it means. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
absolutely.
also think that people can put timelines on grief, which we'll get into. But there's like this idea that one grief is larger than the other. Like if somebody is grieving the loss of a loved one and somebody else over here is grieving the loss of a pet, then somehow the grief, it has some kind of hierarchy. And personally, I don't believe that should be the case. I mean, definitely there are more traumatic experiences that a person can have around loss and around grief. But I think putting hierarchy or, some sort of this grief is more monumental than yours, I think that's kind of a problem that our society has.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, it undermines a person's right to grieve.
I think that when someone is grieving, it really does depend on their relationship, the relationship that they may have had with their pet, with the person, and to what extent that is. It's not necessarily what that person is grieving, but it's about their connection, how they related to him.
Yeah.
And speaking of connections, because I've heard people say, which, it's a little offensive, but I've heard people say, oh, well, you weren't really even that close to this person. So I don't know why you're so bothered. You weren't married to this person, or, you know, that wasn't your sister, or that wasn't, you know, and you know, and you're denying that person their right to grieve the loss. You don't know what connection that person had, you know, you don't know what impact that person had in the life of that other person, you know, and it's like you're denying that person the right to grieve the impact that that person had on their life, you know, which is unfair, you
It
know.
really is. It really is. It
I
really
think
is.
it's that a lot of times when celebrities pass away and people cry over their loss, it's like, when you weren't family, you didn't know them. Why are you crying? But you don't know, what that triggers in that person, or what connection or what memories are associated with that celebrity or athlete, or,
Yeah, I know when I heard that that Twitch had committed suicide, that like hit me like incredibly strong. You know, I really grieved the loss. And I think it was because of the impact that his dance had on, you know, society as a whole, and just looking forward to the impact that he and his wife had, you know, on their daily, almost daily dance videos, you know, and just watching the connection, and, you know, and watching how, you know, their dance videos, you know, just made you feel, you know, just this and this joy, and it just made you, just lifted you up, and it just gave you like a sense of happiness, and to have felt that like 2 days before, you know, for him to have posted that with his wife a day or two before, and then for him to have committed suicide a day or two later, that shock and that grief just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I literally grieved that loss for, I want to say, a couple of months. I mean, it took a couple of months for me to snap, you know, out of that sadness of his loss. I didn't know him, but the impact that he had on my life was pretty major, you know, but I, you know, I felt cheated, you know, at his loss. And yeah, and I think it was because of the connection, you know, and I think that we can be connected to people regardless of, you know, whether or not we know them. You know?
Well, let's get into the different types of grief, because there's a few. So there's anticipatory grief. And just like the title says, anticipatory, you're anticipating some sort of loss that's you expect to occur, or it often occurs when situations arise that leads a person to think that death is imminent or loss could be a real possibility. You may start to anticipate the loss and grief aspects of the loss before it occurs, like in an illness, or thinking about the inevitability of your own death. So have you had any experiences personally with anticipatory grief?
I know that with my father-in-law, he, you know, we knew maybe a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks prior, that, you know, that he was not going to make it. And I guess the anticipation, and I'm not a fan of the word anticipation, because anticipation can sometimes seem like you're looking forward to something, which kind of seems like a positive thing, but it's not. But it is forward looking. And I'm not sure that anticipatory grief is, you know, such a great thing. I mean, it will allow you to prepare for the inevitable, but at the same time, it's almost like reliving what is about to happen. And so it's almost like living that death, that inevitable death on a daily basis before it actually happens. And so I'm not sure that that's like such a positive thing. It does allow for the opportunity to say your goodbyes and to say, you know, the things that you would want to say and would need to say. So in that way, it's a positive, but I think in the way that it may affect you, your body and your emotions, I think it can be harder in some ways because you're living with that death feeling, that anticipation, you're living with that dark cloud over you up until it happens. And I think it can be harder.
Yeah. I see it all the time with families in dealing with hospice as a hospice chaplain. I see families have, you know, taking care or providing care, being the caregiver for loved ones who have terminal illnesses. So they know that the end is coming and it's near. And it's that space in between, you know, waking up. Is mother still going to be here with us, you know, or waking up to, you know, just to find out what's going on. It's the waiting that can be seen as the difficult part.
Yeah.
And in some cases, though, it is also can be a relief for the family as well too, because their loved one is no longer in a space or no longer, I guess, themselves of what they used to know of as who mom was or who dad was or grandmother, of who they were. They've kind of transitioned and moved into kind of this different space. And it, of course, it just really depends on the illness and the disease or whatever sickness that they are the symptoms of what they're displaying. And I've seen it in both aspects of it being a very positive thing to where family members have an opportunity to come in and say goodbye to loved ones. And then I've also seen it in a negative light to where it is very difficult to watch a loved one who was so vibrant and was very independent and outgoing and cheerful to be in a space of not being able to display that anymore, or to be in absolute transition from this world to the next. So
Yeah.
it's really an amazing thing to see. Yeah.
It sounds like that the two worlds of anticipatory grief and you can either get one side of the coin or the other. And until you're living that experience, I would imagine it would be difficult to, you know, make a judgment one way or the other, because if you have several months to get closure for a loss or your own passing, that would be considered anticipatory grief, I would imagine. And then on the other side, somebody who is completely consumed every day and not able to be in the moment with anticipating this loss would be the negative side of that. So thank y'all for explaining that. Then we have traumatic grief. And traumatic grief, again, just like it sounds, is when there is an unexpected loss or an out of natural causes type of loss, natural order. Death of a child, death of a parent that's unexpected or sudden, death of a partner or spouse that's unexpected or early, homicide, suicide, or an accident. And we see that, you know, in our world on a daily basis. But in our personal lives, I don't know that we see that on a daily basis. I would hope not. But we see it, you know, in the news traumatic grief all around, which can lead to vicarious trauma, because if we're watching the news and we're seeing, you know, shootings after shootings, or, you know, all of these horrible traumatic experiences that people are living in real time, then it can affect us in that way.
And I think it's hard not to, you know, internalize somewhat of what we see on the news, because it's happening on an almost daily basis, you know, and when you see all of these traumatic things and all of these people dying in traumatic ways, in unexpected ways, sudden ways, and you know, there's no rhyme or reason to it. There's no nothing leading up to it. Like there's no definable explanation to why somebody walks into a bank and shoots it up, or walks into a school and shoots it up, or, you know, you go grocery shopping and you might not come home. There's no definable reason why. There's no explanation why. There's, you know, it's hard not to internalize that type of grief. Or, you know, you hear suicides, the uptake in suicides happening on a, you know, regular basis, and especially among our young, you know, school-age children being bullied and committing suicides. And, you know, you have children school age or grandchildren school age, and you worry about that, and you worry about their coping mechanism, and especially with social media being such that it is, and about the ability for people to discriminate in such a, you know, a massive way, and to be able to do it, you know, pretty much faceless, you know, to be able to do it on the, you know, with social media, and not have to, you know, and not have to really put their face to it, but that they can just do it anonymously, basically, and say what they want to say, and not have to own it. And, you know, and you have these kids that haven't developed the mechanisms to deal with that type of abuse, or that type, you know, those types of attacks, that don't know how to handle that, opting to commit suicide. And you hear about those things, and it's, you know, it's hard to hear these types of things on a regular basis, and not to, you know, not to internalize somewhat those types of trauma that you hear. And even though it might not impact us personally, thankfully, I think it still impacts us to some degree.
I wonder why it is that we tend to, or maybe I should speak for myself personally, because I don't know, maybe this is a thing, but when I hear of stories of like car accidents, there are car crashes all the time. Living near Atlanta, there's car crashes on a daily basis. It seems like somebody's dying in an accident. When we hear about those stories, they don't make me feel the same level of sadness that I would feel hearing about a shooting or hearing about a suicide. And I wonder why, because it's a car accident is just as traumatic.
Of course.
And is it a desensitization that's happening? Alexia, you have any insight into that?
In car accidents, I think when it comes to children, anything dealing with children is going to kind of raise or heighten our senses. when it comes to grieving and to loss and how we cope. Whenever you put a child in the mix, you know, you think about the innocence, you think about they haven't lived their full of life yet, you know, they had so much more to live, potential, you know, all these things come to play. You think about your own children. So I think we immediately go into a space of, wow, their life ended too soon.
Mhm.
You know, I think that that's just kind of like how we are kind of sensitized, how to feel emotionally is to look at children as innocents and as, they haven't even lived yet. Not to say that a child's death has a greater or more of an impact than an adult. Not to say that, but you know, we typically go into that space of, you know, this child hasn't lived yet.
Yeah.
So that would be that's what I would kind of think about when we talk about like school shootings versus, you know, car accidents and things of that nature. It's just something about children, you know, something about the innocence of them not knowing and not having life to live.
Definitely.
Plus,
Yeah.
I think too, with regards to car accidents versus something like school shootings, is that with regards to car accidents, you know, so many safety precautions or safety regulations have been put in place. You know, we have our seatbelt laws in place. We have our speed limit laws in place. You know, the government has stepped in and said, if you go over a certain speed limit, you're going to be ticketed. You know, if you drive drunk, you're going to be arrested. If you drive impaired, you're going to be arrested. If you drive without your seatbelt, you know, there's going to be a price to pay. You know, they've regulated so many things regarding driving now. So people are like, you know, more cautious and more, you know, a little more in line. And so when a car accident happens, you know, there's an element of feeling like, you know, measures were in place to ensure safety so that if someone passed in a car accident, then, you know, most everything was in place to ensure that death didn't happen. So that if it did happen, that it was inevitable, perhaps. You know, that, you know, anything that could have been done possibly would have been done. And if it were a result of a, you know, person driving drunk, or, you know, that there were gonna be, you know, that there was gonna be a price to pay, you know, as a result of that. But with things like, you know, shootings and things like that, there's no regulation really around that. There's no safety mechanism in place right now to protect that. So I think that right now it's like, you know, there's no watchdog.
I have two more left for this section, and I'm going to kind of lump them together because they kind of can go together. Sort of. Cumulative grief is loss that you experience that's like one after the other, or experiencing loss before you've had a chance to grieve the first loss that you've experienced. And then collective grief is one that's felt by a group, a community, a group of people, even a nation that can experience extreme change or loss. The ripple effect of a massive change or loss, like natural disasters, death of a public figure, terrorist attacks, the pandemic, things like that. And that can, why I said it can go together is because often I know from the pandemic standpoint, a lot of people lost loved ones back to back getting
Mhm.
the disease. You know, it was just one right after the other. And then watching from the outside, watching, you know, all of it happen. If we talk back about the news, we were hearing about people dying left and right. So you weren't able to recover from hearing about the first loss. And then with, you know, events like natural disasters, sometimes people experience one disaster and then another tornado comes or a fire happens or something like that. So they kind of go hand in hand
Mhm.
sometimes. Would you all agree with that?
The cumulative grief just feels like it kind of piles on top of another, and where I think that a person can experience that individually, I think that that was made really manifested. Um, so during the pandemic,
Yeah.
when families experience that loss, you know, when a father passed and then a mother passed from, you know, from COVID, or, you know, a grandmother passed and then a mother passed and then maybe a child passed, you know, and it was, you know, it was cumulative. We as a nation, you know, experienced it collectively, because then it wasn't, you know, it wasn't just one family, but it was multiple families. We collectively grieved, you know, our nation. And it was, you know, daily hundreds of names were called out, you know, in news reports,
Right.
you know, state by state, you know, this is who we lost today. Families that weren't able to go and be with their loved ones that passed, and you
Yeah,
had,
that's it. Like the nursing, sorry to interrupt, but like the nursing staff, you know, that's a really good point. The medical staff experience both cumulative grief and collective grief because of the
Right,
experiences they were having.
yeah,
right,
yeah, the
right,
medical staff as a whole, you know, doctors and nurses and, you know, healthcare workers as a whole, because, you know, you don't just have the nurses, but, you know, you have the technicians and you have the, you know, all the technicians, the laboratory technicians, the, you know, the x-ray technicians, you know, you have all of
Mhm.
these people that have to work together to take care of this, you know, sick individual. And you know, while all alone, while, you know, risking their own lives, but to be there for these individuals whose family cannot and were not allowed to be there, you know. And
Mhm.
then you have these families that have to grieve the potential loss and the likely loss of their loved one, and they can't physically be there to say goodbye.
I actually had a friend who's lost her mother and her sister, and then within, I think within a month of one another. I also had another friend who lost her mother one week and her dad the next week. Totally, the second death was totally unexpected. It just happened, and um, two things came out of that. For the one who lost the mother one week and the father the second week, she grieved, but she said that one of the things that I never thought that she would say was, she's like, I'm so sorry that I lost both of my parents, but I'm glad they did it right behind one another so that I can grieve them both together. So that was totally kind of unexpected. But she said that, you know, that's what she experienced, you know. But the other young lady who lost her mother and her sister right within months of one another, that was very difficult for her because those were her only two last living relatives. And yeah, and because she had a very small family. And so it impacted her very differently. And she's still having a very difficult time coping and getting back on track with life because of, again, her connection.
Yeah.
Grief is very peculiar in that way.
It
You
is.
know, it is very peculiar.
Alexia, how would you help somebody who is experiencing I keep wanting to say trauma, but it is trauma, but grief in that way, a loss back to back like that, not having the opportunity to process anything yet?
Well, the first thing I would do is, if they have the time, is take the time to grieve. Meaning, getting out of commitments, if there was time that they could get off of a job or any type of taking FMLA or anything like that. But really and truly would be to actually take the time to grieve and sit with those feelings. I think it is very important that we honor those feelings of grief, those feelings of sadness, the feelings of missing a loved one, and with that, and respecting how we are feeling in that moment. So that would be one of the things. I know a lot of people who experiencing back-to-back grief like that, or back-to-back deaths, they also have difficulty sleeping and just difficulty carrying on with just day-to-day life. A loss of appetite or an increase of appetite, loss of sleep, or it's either insomnia or sleeping way too much. So it's usually the extremes that people have. And these are usually symptoms of depression. And so that's why I would say that perhaps they may need to get medicated. Just to kind of assist. And it might be short term, just until they could get some counseling, get some grief counseling to help them to find other ways of coping. Some other things, there are a lot of support groups, a lot of grief support groups, bereavement support groups for people. And they're online. They have some support groups that are online. They have in-person support groups that I would advise. And it's just something about being among people with similar stories that you can connect to. If you listen to other people and the way that they are dealing with how they're grieving. So I would definitely maybe refer someone to a group. Let's see. Writing and journaling is another very positive way of coping, and just honoring, honoring that the memory of the loss of loved ones. But it's important for me. It's important for that person to have a support system as well too. Someone, or have a group of people who they can trust, and a group of people who will be able to empathize, not necessarily judge or be critical of how they're grieving, but to be able to sit in a space with them and empathize and listen and hear and be with them, and not necessarily take them off of the track of grieving. Because sometimes we are so quick to kind of get people to, let's get moving, let's go shopping, let's go this, let's go here, and that's not necessarily what that person needs at that moment. They need to just kind of sit in that space, and have somebody to be there with them. So those are some of the things that I would just kind of, advise or encourage, in that way.
I'm so glad that you said that too. And that kind of leads us to the stages of grief that we're getting ready to talk about. But, people are so quick to be like, well, you should be over this by now. It's been, whatever. And it can depend on what you're talking about, but it's almost dismissive, or because you're not experiencing that sadness. It's like, no, this person 6 months from now is still going to probably be experiencing something in stages that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I think that people have a need to want to fix the person that's grieving.
Yeah,
When
absolutely.
they want to snap the person out of it. And so they feel like it's their mission to do something other than to listen and sit with that person and watch that person grieve. You know, I think that they feel like they're not doing something right if they just sit quietly
Mhm.
and do nothing but listen, or nothing but sit and watch. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like the person just needs a person,
Right.
needs a body to be with them. And I think
Right.
that people feel like that's failure, like that's not enough. And
Mhm.
sometimes that's the only thing that's needed.
That's right.
You don't need to have the answer. You don't need to do anything. You just need to be. That's all you
That's
need to
exactly
be,
right.
is be. And I think that people feel like that's inadequate. But it's like Constance was saying, I think that, people have a time limit, a time frame that they feel like, somebody should be over it. And when it's outside of their time frame, then they feel like, okay, let's move on. Come on, time to
Yeah.
move on. We're gonna kind of compare the 5 stages of grief versus the 7 stages of grief, which I think forever it was always the 5 stages of grief, which I think
Mhm.
was known to society for a very long time. And there were 5 stages of grief. We're going to dive into the 5 stages of grief in more detail, but the 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And so the first stage of grief is denial. And denial in grief may manifest itself as numbing, shock, disbelief over the loss. And according to Kubler-Ross, denial acts as a kind of grace period while the griever digests the news.
Mm.
So it's kind of a disbelief,
Mhm.
I can't believe this happened.
Mhm. Mhm.
This didn't, no, this isn't true.
Right. 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 It happens a lot too, I think, with people who are terminally ill and they're the caregivers of people who are terminally ill. I see it all the time where they are caregiving for a parent who has been diagnosed with, cancer or a terminal illness. And what they used to be very independent and able to walk and able to, do their activities of daily living on their own. And then all of a sudden their bodies are changing and they're not able to eat like they used to, and they're not able to drink like they used to. They can't ambulate and walk from one space to another. They need more assistance with taking showers and caring for themselves. And so it's now like, I've seen caregivers like, Mom, you know you can get up and walk. Come on now, get up and walk. Or I know you're hungry. You haven't eaten since yesterday. You need to eat. That's how your body gets nourishment. You haven't drank any water. And what it is that the body is not wanting, or is deteriorating, and the body does not want that anymore. And it's very tough for a caregiver to be in a space of denial, and provide care, and not and still want that person to perform and to do and be independent like they used to. It can be very tough for the caregiver, and very tough for the patient, the person that who's declining and being their body preparing to transition. So it's just really a tough space for both to live in. I find that the patients are the ones that want to try to do, but they can't, And so it's kind of like this space of I want to be hopeful for my loved one. I want to be able to do what she's asking me here. She is asking me to do, but I can't. And sometimes being able to articulate that is even difficult and hard. And so it can become just a really, really tough space for the two. Yeah. So denial is very difficult. Yeah.
And it's kind of like when I knew my father-in-law, when we had to put him in hospice, I know when a person's preparing to transition, the food that they need is very different. They're preparing to transition. So what they need is more of a spiritual. Their needs become more spiritual and not so much physical. And so even though we on this side of heaven knows, or we on this side knows that medicine is gonna help sustain them, and food and liquid is gonna sustain them and keep them here longer, their body knows that it's shutting down. And their body knows that these things are not gonna keep them here longer. And so their body is doing the things that it needs to do to prepare to cross over, to prepare to leave. And so I think that because we're not ready for them to go, we're stuck in this denial place. But their body is saying, this is what I need to do to leave here.
Right.
So I gotta do what I gotta do to leave.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And I think that we, are being stuck, in our denial place doesn't really serve them very well.
No, it doesn't.
Which I wonder if that's why a lot of people who are beginning their transition often leave or start their actual transition when their loved ones are not in the room. I know with my mom, my husband and I and her friend, we literally were in her room, in her hospital room, like by her bedside, just like, she's off life support, everything is, taken off, and we're just ready and with her, waiting for her to make her transition. And pretty much the moment the nurse asked us to leave for them to do their nurse conversion, she started to transition. And we, ran in, and thank God we got in time before she, transitioned, but she started to go. I mean, it was like we left and she was like, oh, happy day. These people are, they're gone. Let me go. They're holding me back. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like my grandfather. He was hanging on, but my grandmother went into the kitchen and he was like, I'm out. You know what I mean? It's like, I wonder if that's why I'm wondering if that's part of why they wait until their loved one is out of their presence to leave, because we make it maybe so hard for them to go because of our denial and our love wanting to keep them here. And, and it's hard, I'm imagining, for them to grapple with the decision to go versus not.
Yeah. I think denial too plays a big part in, if I admit to what I'm seeing and what's going on right now, I'm giving up on hope. I'm just giving up on everything. And to do that, I will be a bad person. To do that, I don't want to live with the guilt of, if I haven't tried everything I could have possibly tried to help my loved one in this moment, then I am not doing everything that I could do. And so denial is really about the person that's living. you know,
Right.
and dealing with all of the stuff that we did or didn't do, or think, how are people going to see me as a caregiver? What are people going to say? It's really our stuff that we're dealing with, you know, and that we have to kind of, we have to let go in order to let them go. Yeah, it's our stuff.
Our
Yeah.
stuff. I get you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the next one is anger. Anger may show up as frustration or outsized reaction to seemingly benign occurrences, and can serve as a source of focus when placing the blame for grief.
I feel like I live in that state, like first, like the denial doesn't happen immediately. I'm angry. Like, and when my grandmother, my mother's mother, passed away, I was angry initially because I had left the hospital. I got to say goodbye, but I had left the hospital. And in my, like you said, Alexia, it's our stuff. In my mind, I thought, oh, well, she'll wait until I come back, because I left to drop my kids off at my dad's house, and then I was going to come back to the hospital, and I wanted to be there when she died. I wanted to like be in the room, and that wasn't for me to do. And so when I got the call, or I got the text that she was gone, I was immediately angry and distraught. And I feel like when I hear about, you know, violence that occurs in our society, my go-to is anger. Like, there's no denial. It's just immediately, I am angry. I wonder how many people experience that too. I'm sure a lot of our listeners and viewers, maybe that's their go-to first as well.
Yeah. I see it all the time. Anger comes out where, you know, they're angry that the person is leaving. They're angry that there was unfinished business that needed to be said, or that, you know, it could be for a number of reasons that anger comes through. And if we look back, we know that anger is really a version of hurt. You know, that is, if we look at that, the initial feeling that comes in, that's really if I could say a close cousin to anger would be, or the initial feeling is hurt. You know, that person is really experiencing. And so to dive a little bit, you know, to find out what is the anger that you're feeling. And when you really peel back the layers, it's really, I'm hurt. I'm hurt because I wasn't able to be there, you know, when she passed. I'm hurt because, you know, I didn't get a chance to say what I wanted to say. You know, I'm angry at myself because, you know, so it's those feelings of anger that we have to deal with when losing somebody. And it all really kind of goes back to, what are you hurting about? What's the real hurt that you're experiencing?
I'm glad you said that, because anger is like a surface level emotion, and there's always deeper layers under there that you have to dig into. And I wanted to point out before we continue that it's interesting too that these stages don't have to be in any particular order that you experience them. And one thing that we haven't pointed out is that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who is a psychiatrist who actually coined these, her making these 5 stages of grief was never intended to be used the way that it's been used. It actually, she intended it to be used for people who were dealing with terminal illness or finding out they have cancer or something like that. And so we've taken it and adopted it to what we've adopted it to.
Right.
Right. Absolutely. And I think speaking to anger though, I think that we've also targeted our anger towards God
Yes.
when we lose someone that we're close to also, you know what I mean? And it kind of becomes our excuse for pulling away from him as well, for allowing this person that we love to be taken from us. And and we're so angry, and I think people around us become fearful when we voice that. Ooh, you're angry at God. Oh, that's dangerous. But he knows when we're angry at him, and I think that for us to deny that, I think that it's crazy. You know what I mean? He knows that. I mean, he knows, and I think he's okay with us, working through that.
Absolutely.
He knows how we feel, and he knows how to handle us.
Yeah.
And he knows how to help us through that. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But it's like, and he knows that it's, the foundation is hurt. And he, I think, and so I think that that's one of the things that, I think he's one of our targets.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. I think anger comes in a space too of just trying to blame. Sometimes we want to blame, we want to place blame on something, someone, God, the doctor, the medical community,
Exactly.
The caregivers, the drunk driver. We want to place blame on a lot of, we need that.
Yeah,
we
but
need,
for this, that wouldn't have happened.
Exactly. Right. And that's what we need to help us to help us to get through. And so that in that space of anger, that's where we are. Oh, I've got to blame somebody. Who was the cause of this? Who did this? And even blaming the person who's dying. In spaces of, if they would have stopped smoking when I told them to stop smoking, if they would have cut back on the sugar, then they wouldn't have had the diabetes that caused, if they wouldn't have went to the sun tanning salon and got those radiations put in there, it's always something. You have to place blame. So it's angry. The anger comes out. Anger comes out. Yeah.
Another is bargaining, and bargaining may show itself as prayers to a higher power, if only, and what if statements, promises and exchanges, and leave the griever attempting to negotiate with loss. What do y'all think about bargaining?
I think bargaining is pretty self-explanatory when it comes to understanding the concept of it. However, I can't say that I've seen or witnessed bargaining in the aspect that maybe we've been taught. If somebody's like, God, please, bring this person back, or, take me instead, that's the way I've viewed it, is like, take me instead.
Yes, I've seen it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've not witnessed it after a person has passed, unless it was a child that has passed and the parent is bargaining with the Lord to bring them back, take me instead. In that situation, I can see bargaining.
Yeah.
Do you see in the hospice space?
Not typically, at least not during my tenure. I've usually either it's denial, anger, or depression, and sometimes acceptance. But not necessarily a whole lot of bargaining. I do hear, prayers of hope. People continue, they want hope for their loved ones, and me as a chaplain, their request is, you know, when I offer prayer, they say, well, we want to pray for a miracle. We want you to pray for a miracle.
Yeah.
You know, so in that way of bargaining with God, and saying, God, you know, we want you to perform a miracle on our loved one, and we want to see it. We want it to happen. You know, we want to display a miracle, and if you display this miracle, then of course we're going to tell everybody God performed a miracle on our grandmother. She's continuing to live. She's got another couple of days, you know, or she's still here with us. So in that way, that's the way that I've experienced or seen the bargaining is through prayer.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that. I was thinking about too the way that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross intended this to be. If we think about the way she intended these stages to be applied, then one would say that they, you know, maybe experience bargaining if they get diagnosed with something like, oh, I will stop drinking if you just take this liver failure away, or, you know, I will stop this if you do this. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Next is depression. One of the more recognizable stages of grief is depression. And depression is when we feel the loss more accurately. It may feel like you're blanketed with a heaviness and clouded by fatigue, you know, this weight.
Yeah. Depression usually comes in a space of thinking about past, thinking about what happened in the past, whereas anxiety is worried and concerned about future things that you really have no control over. And even for depression, a lot of people are concerned about, you know, shoulda, woulda, coulda, you know, what I should have done, what I could have done with my loved one, that kind of thing. So, and even in the person who is experiencing, who has the illness or the disease, they experience a lot of depression as well too. And just, you know, being regretful, feelings of guilt come out, and feelings of shame come out in this area of depression, of what I should have done, what I could have done differently. You know, because most of the times, a lot of people who have terminal illnesses may have some time to think and about some things that they did or did not do, and they oftentimes, you know, feel regret, feel shame, feel remorse about maybe relationships that have unfinished business, things that they may have done in the past. And so, yes, depression is very much surfaces for people on both sides, on both the caregiver side and on the patient side. Yeah.
Acceptance is number 5, and many mistakenly believe that this is the stage where the griever gets over their loss, but this is simply not the case. Rather, acceptance is the act of moving forward and learning to adjust to this new reality.
That statement is so true. I have definitely seen people in a space of, I accept the fact that my mother is leaving me. I don't appreciate it. I don't like it, but I'm accepting it.
And acceptance too, you know, if we apply other scenarios to the acceptance, you know, if somebody loses their house to a fire or a natural disaster, after they've processed through the experience, it's like, okay, I don't like the fact that this happened, but I want to rebuild. So let me rebuild. It's that acceptance as well. So acceptance can look like a lot of things, a plethora of experiences.
Absolutely.
Did you have anything to add, Mom, before I move on?
Yeah, I think my mother has been gone. This December will mark 10 years that she's been gone. And I think this year actually marked my first year of acceptance. So it's like 10 years to get to a place of acceptance. And I don't mean that I haven't accepted the fact that she's been gone. I've accepted the fact that she's been gone almost 10 years ago, but reframing her loss, I was able to reframe her loss. So I had a dream months ago, or a month or so ago, and it helped me to reframe her loss. And so I went from feeling like I lost my mother on December the 13th, to that being the anniversary of my mother's death, to that being my mother's rebirth day. So now on this coming December the 13th, I now look at that day as my mother's 10th rebirth day. So now I can look at that, I've reframed that. And now to me, that's almost like a rebirth day celebration for her being in a better place now.
Beautiful.
And so I have accepted the fact that, you know, she's not suffering any longer, and the place that she is much better. And I heard a story that really resonated with me this year. There were these kids in heaven, and they were all gathered together, and they were off, and they were all they all had candles lit, and they all were gathered together, and they were all, you know, just gleeful and happy, and you know, and all kind of gathered together and singing, and there was this one little kid, and he was off to the side, and his candle wasn't lit, and one of the angels went to him and asked him, you know, why aren't you joining us, and why is your candle no longer lit? Because it was lit with the other kids. And he's like, well, I can't, because every time my candle gets lit, my parents' tears put it out. And it's like, because his parents continue to grieve him, he can't enjoy his place in heaven. He can't, you know, he can't move on because they haven't moved on. And it's like, and so, you know, that coupled with, you know, the dream I had, and reframing her passing has helped bring me to a place after 10 years of acceptance, you know.
That's cool. Very, very powerful. Thank you all so much for this discussion. Did any of you have any words that you wanted to share about this experience, or what you hope that the audience takes away from this podcast?
Wow, I'm just honored that you all have asked me to be on this panel. I am grateful. I think that this is definitely a topic that needs to be discussed more. Death is really very mysterious. It always has been. It's just like birth is.
Mhm.
There's this space of the unknown, and I think that the fear of death and dying comes in the unknown, and in that space of the unknown. But there's more to talk about, and
just know that there's a community out there, that there's resources out there for you to help you through whatever processes you need to go through.
Mhm.
And we hope that you utilize that, and there'll be resources attached to this podcast as always.
Thank you all so much for this important conversation. And we hope that whoever's listening, whoever's watching, that you take something from this and can apply it to yourself or share it with somebody in your life who may be experiencing grief or loss in whatever capacity, however you feel like it can help them. Thank you so much, and be blessed.
Thank you.
Thank
Until
you.
next time. See you later. Bye.